In this lesson, we're going to go over the rest of these modes on this camera. So these might be options on your Canon DSLR, they might not be. So as we go around, let's start from manual and go up to the next one. The cool thing is that if you're looking at the back of your screen, you get a kind of a definition of what these settings are gonna be. So if we go to the next one, this is going to be creative filters. So if you press the down button, you can see that this one allows you to create photos with cool little filters. So if we go in the live mode here, then press the Q button and then go into this first option at the top left. Here you can set your mode: grainy black and white, soft focus, fisheye effect, water painting effect, toy camera miniature effect, HDR, HDR art bold. These are different HDR modes. All right, would I ever use these creative filter modes myself? No, because I'm gonna do most of my editing after the fact, and I can use my editing application on my computer to turn my photo into any of these sort of filtered looks. That being said, if you wanna play around with them and get creative with them and just have everything done in camera, that's there for you to use. So let's take a picture. So when I take a picture, it's grainy, black and white. Let's go in and change it to, let's go back to our live mode, press Q, set our filter to something different. Let's do fisheye effect. It's going to turn it into some sort of fisheye effect. Now, the thing is, a fisheye effect should actually come from a fisheye lens, which is a very extreme wide lens. And so this is just digitally distorting it to look that way. And I don't necessarily recommend doing it with the filters in camera, but it's an option. We're gonna go to our next mode, which is the scene mode. So this gives you some options for special types of scenes, such as group photos, things like that. When it's dark outside, fireworks, candles. So again, if we go into preview our live mode, and then we press our Q button, go into this mode. Here we have group photo, kids, food, night portrait, handheld night scene, HDR backlight control. So for example, this one says it takes 3 consecutive shots, one at a lower exposure, one at a higher exposure, one in the middle, and that way when you combine them, it creates a well-exposed photo overall. So with each of these modes, it's just kind of going to manually adjust the settings to make sure it looks good for these types of scenes. For example, with the kids photo shot, this mode probably has a limit on how slow the shutter speed can be, so that if you're taking photos of a kid, they're not going to be blurry with a lower shutter speed. With group photo, this is going to use a little bit of a deeper depth of field, so a smaller aperture or a higher f-stop, so that it has a deep enough depth of field so that if there's a lot of different people in a photo, everyone's in focus. With the food mode, it's going to make your colors a little bit more vibrant. The night portrait mode looks like it's going to use the flash so that the person in the foreground is exposed well along with the background, and so on and so forth. So that's the scene modes option. Again, similar to the creative filters, I don't use these modes myself that often, but if you're just getting started out and you're in a particular scenario, try using one of these to see if it helps you out. The next one is the sports mode. So if I go to the icon of the guy running or the girl running, this mode is going to do things like try to track objects. So it's going to change your autofocus modes to tracking moving objects rather than just picking one focus. something we haven't really covered yet in this class are those different types of focus modes. It's also going to allow continuous shooting. So if you hold down the shutter speed or the shutter button, it's going to take multiple photos at once. The next mode is going to be close-up mode. So this is like kind of like a macro mode. This one allows you to have more of a macro effect where you can take photos of something very close up. So if you're taking a photo of something really small detailed, I would go to that mode. We've got landscape mode. So this is gonna make your photos a little bit sharper and clearer and boost the colors like the blues and greens to make sure those landscapes look good. And then lastly, we've got portrait mode. So portrait mode is going to have a blurrier background. So it's gonna do things like keeping your aperture wide open, a smaller f-stop so that you get a blurry background. It's gonna soften things like hair and skin. And when I say these things like softening skin, making landscapes sharper, it actually is literally processing your image differently. So internally, it can do things like that. It can make your image a little bit sharper. It can make your image a little bit softer, which makes portraits look even better. It can make colors more saturated or less saturated. So that's what's happening in each of these different modes. It's just trying to do it for you. And I would say the portrait mode, the sports mode, the landscape mode, these are ones that, hey, I would check out myself if I were getting started and use those modes. Personally, I use mostly manual, aperture priority, and shutter priority, but it's cool that there's options there for you. The last option is this CA, which is the Creative Auto. So again, this is an auto setting, but it adjusts the color of your images. So if we go into our live view, so to get to this setting, you go into your Q settings, and then it's this one over here on the right-hand side. And this is where you can change it to like a soft, warm, intense, cool look. This is really just adjusting things like your white balance, which is how yellow or blue or warm or cool your image is, and things like saturation. So going from like black and white to very colorful or less color or less saturated colors. So these are, again, things that I typically do when I am editing my photos after the fact. But if you want to do them in camera, this is another option for it. So I would say like a lot of these things kind of overlap and are similar. The Creative Auto settings are more just having to do with your colors. Creative Filters option are a little bit more intense in terms of adding digital effects and distortion like grain or warping your images to make them look like fisheye. So these are options that you may or may not have with your DSLR. But like everything, it's just a good thing to play around with it, see what they do, and maybe you'll find a mode that you actually do like and want to use. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, I want to talk about bulb mode. Some DSLRs will have a letter B on this little dial, and that's going to be bulb mode. The Canon T7i doesn't have the bulb mode option in the dial, but it is an option within the manual setting. So what is bulb mode? Basically, bulb mode allows you to manually adjust your shutter speed depending on how long you press the shutter release button down. So it's going to basically stay open as long as you are pressing the shutter button. So let's go into our manual settings. So if we're in manual mode and I either just take my dial all the way to the left, past 30 seconds, it switches to bulb mode. So if you need a shutter that is longer than 30 seconds, you're going to need to use bulb mode. Now, just to show you a little bit clearer, if I press the Q button and then enter this, here you can see another kind of mode or view of this. Past 30, we go into bulb. Again, this might just be an option up on your dial, but if I choose this now, I can literally just open the shutter, and then it's counting 2, 3, 4. And of course, that's gonna be way too bright for this situation because there's a lot of light in this room, and a 4-second exposure is gonna be way overexposed. So when would you actually want the bulb setting? Well, there are situations where you want a shutter speed that's longer than 30 seconds. If you're doing long exposures during the day or night, if you're using filters called neutral density filters or ND filters for those long exposure photos during the day or again at night, you might need a 1 minute exposure to have a proper exposure. A lot of the times this will be with your night photography. If you're trying to get star trails or astrophotography, you're going to be using really long exposures, and so that might be a case where you need to manually open and close your shutter speed. Now, one note about that though is if you're doing this handheld, you're going to get some camera shake. So you're going to want to have this on a tripod, and on top of putting it on a tripod, you're going to want to have a shutter release cable or a remote that plugs in here that you can manually control it, so that even just pressing the button right here on your camera, even if it's on a tripod, that can sometimes cause a little bit of shake that you might not want. So that's what bulb mode is, and if you see that B on your camera dial, now you know what it is and why you would use it. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson.